There was a bank account that held nearly 4 billion euros in cash. It sat on paper at Bank of America in New York. It belonged to a small subsidiary of one of the largest food companies in Europe. And it was the proof, the hard, audited proof, that the company was rich. There was only one problem with the account. It did not exist. The cash was not there. The account was not there. The document that confirmed it, the single letter the auditors relied on, was a forgery. The company was Parmalat. It made milk, real milk in real cartons in 139 factories across roughly 30 countries. It employed about 36,000 people. Almost everything about it was real, everything except the one number it needed most. Every fraud is a clock, and from the very first day, one number on Parmalat's books was wrong. Not a little wrong, but wholly imaginary. This is the story of a company that had cows, factories, and customers on every continent, and was destroyed by the only thing it did not have, the cash it kept saying it had. Start with what was true, because most of it was. Callisto Tanzi founded Parmalat in the town of Parma in the early 1960s. He started small, a single pasteurizing plant, and over 40 years he built it into a global dairy and food group. Long life milk, yogurt, juice, biscuits. The brand was on supermarket shelves from Italy to Brazil to Australia. This was not a paper company. It sold things people drank. The trucks were real. The payroll was real. Tens of thousands of families earned a living from it, and that reality was the disguise. A company that visibly makes and sells things is a company you tend to trust. You can see the cartons. You assume the books behind them are just as solid. Investors lent Parmalat money, billions of it in bonds, year after year, partly because it felt safe. It was milk. Milk does not vanish. But underneath the cartons, the company had a second life, made of numbers, and in that second life, the cash on the books kept growing. Large balances, comfortable reserves, money supposedly sitting safely in banks. The more bonds Parmalat sold, the more cash it seemed to have. That should have been the warning. A company drowning in healthy cash does not need to keep borrowing. Parmalat did both for years. It held huge reported reserves, and it kept issuing new debt to investors around the world, including more than $1 billion sold privately to institutions in the United States. One of those two facts was a lie. It was always going to be the cash. Here is the one number, and here is why it was wrong from the first day. The fraud at its core was simple. Parmalat reported cash and securities it did not have. When auditors asked for proof, the company produced confirmations, letters that appeared to come from banks vouching that the money was really there. The largest of these pointed to a subsidiary called Bonlat, and to that account at Bank of America. Nearly 4 billion euros, roughly $4.9 billion in cash and securities, all of it confirmed by a document. The document was forged. The money was never there. And this is the honest center of it. Inventing cash is not like inventing a profit. A fake profit can drift quietly for years. Nobody opens a box to check, but cash is supposed to be real. The one number you can in theory verify by simply asking the bank. So once Parmalat wrote down cash it did not have, it had created a clock. Every year, the company had to service real debt, pay real interest, repay real bonds, out of cash that in the fake parts of the books did not exist. There was only one way to keep the clock running. Borrow more. Issue a new bond to honor the old one. Roll the debt forward again and again while the gap underneath grew. That was the arithmetic that could be known from the very first day. You cannot fill a hole in your cash by borrowing more cash. You can only move the hole into the future and make it bigger on the way. For a long time the clock kept time, and almost no one heard it. The reported cash made Parmalat look strong so it could keep selling bonds. The bonds brought in real money, which paid the bills the fake cash could not. As long as new lenders kept buying, the gap stayed buried. By the autumn of 2003, it was no longer small. United States regulators would later allege that Parmalat had overstated its cash and securities by at least $4.9 billion at the end of 2002, and that its real debt was billions higher than what it had told the world. Then the buying slowed. Investors began to ask harder questions, and a company that survives only by rolling its debt cannot afford for the music to stop, even for a moment. In December 2003, the moment came. There was doubt about whether Parmalat could meet a bond payment, a sum of around 150 million euros. small against its supposed billions in cash. A company truly sitting on 4 billion euros would not blink at it. Parmalat blinked. That was the thread. When it was pulled, someone finally did the one thing the fraud could not survive. They asked the bank. Bank of America said there was no such account. The nearly 4 billion euros did not exist. The confirmation was a forgery. And once that single letter was exposed as paper and ink, every other number resting on it collapsed at once. What the unwinding revealed was a hole of about 14 billion euros, roughly $20 billion, between what Parmalat said it was worth and what was actually there. At the time, it was the largest bankruptcy Europe had ever seen. The press gave it a name borrowed from across the Atlantic, Europe's Enron. The real victims were ordinary. Tens of thousands of bondholders. In all, well over 100,000 investors are reported to have lost money, many of them small savers in Italy who had been told that lending to a milk company was about as safe as money could be. The courts took years. Callisto Tanzi was prosecuted in more than one Italian city. In Milan, he was convicted in a case centered on false accounts and misleading the market. On appeal, that sentence was ultimately set at about 8 years. In Parma, he was convicted of fraudulent bankruptcy and criminal conspiracy and sentenced to 18 years. He admitted diverting hundreds of millions of euros to cover losses in other family businesses, and admitted knowing the accounts were being falsified. Callisto Tanzi died in January 2022 at 83. Others were charged and convicted as well. And beyond the company, the lawsuits ran for years, against auditors, against banks, across several countries. Many were settled. We will say only what the record settled, the people the courts convicted, and nothing about anyone they did not. Strip away the scale and Parmalat is almost embarrassingly simple. A company wrote down money it did not have. Then it borrowed real money to keep up the appearance of it. And it did that for years because the cartons were real, the factories were real, and nobody wanted to believe that the cash of all things was the part that was made up. But cash is the easiest number to fake, precisely because it feels the hardest. We treat it as the solid floor under everything else. We rarely think to open the box and check. Parmalat understood that. For a while, a single forged letter was all it took to keep 4 billion euros alive. 17 frauds, 1 clock, money, a phone call, code, a machine, a signature, a coin that was only a number, a profit that was never cash, a risk dressed up as arbitrage, gold from the wrong place, a cost that called itself an asset, a deposit that was never safe, an engine that knew when it was being watched, a sales target nobody could hit honestly, a number set by asking instead of measuring, a wall between your money and theirs, a price pushed so high it could never be sold, and now a cash balance that was only a letter. The thing they ask you to believe in keeps changing. The clock never does. There's always a next one. Thanks for watching Quiet Loops.